The man in the picture is Dr. Mark Johnson, originally from Sudan, and at the center of one of the most mysterious cases, meticulously committed by someone determined not to leave any evidence behind. This led to over 200 suspects being considered. If it weren't for a mobile phone signal reaching the authorities, this case might have remained unsolved. Dr. Mark Johnson in the full story from 2021, specifically on June 3rd, a report was filed by Dr. Mark Johnson's cousin, Jessica Thompson, informing the police that her cousin and his mother, Mrs. Amelia Smith, had been missing for more than 3 days, with no one having any information about their whereabouts. Dr. Mark's siblings, who live abroad, were the ones who urged her to contact the police, as both her brother's and mother's phones had been switched off for an unusually long time, which was highly unusual. Jessica reported that she personally visited their home multiple times and knocked on the door, but no one responded. Even Dr. Mark's friends and colleagues had been inquiring about his unexplained absence from work, which was out of character for him. She also learned from his assistant that Dr. Mark had scheduled a specific number of patients for consultations at his private clinic. After confirming the appointments, the assistant realized that Dr. Mark was no longer responding to his calls, and soon after, his phone was completely switched off. Immediately, a search warrant was issued by the prosecutor's office, and a team of officers headed to Dr. Mark Johnson's residence, located in one of the most upscale areas of the city of Khartoum. As soon as the officers opened the door to the 4-story house, they were shocked by the foul odor emanating from the garden. The police officers followed the stench and were shocked to find traces of blood leading to the servants' quarters in the garden. Upon entering, they discovered Dr. Mark Johnson's body on the ground, his hands and feet bound and positioned as if in prayer. It was evident that he had been struck multiple times on the head, as there were clear signs of bleeding from the back of his skull. The body had already begun to decompose due to the heavy bleeding and the high humidity, exacerbated by the intense heat and lack of ventilation in the room. The officers immediately began searching the rest of the house and moved to the first floor, where they found the apartment door securely locked. Outside the door, there was a bag of fruit and a watermelon nearby. Upon entering the apartment, they discovered the body of Mrs. Amelia Smith, his mother, lying on the living room floor. It was clear that she had been strangled to death, as indicated by the marks on her neck. However, her body had not yet started decomposing because the air conditioning in the house had been running continuously. The police immediately began their investigation, calling in forensic experts. Everything about this case was challenging and complex, and every new discovery added to the mystery. There were many reasons for this complexity, which will be revealed later. The first step the police took was to investigate Dr. Mark Johnson's background, who he was and who might have had a motive to kill him and his mother. Dr. Mark Johnson was 43 years old, unmarried, and worked as a highly respected ENT specialist in Khartoum. He was very successful in his profession, attracting patients from all over Sudan due to his expertise. Dr. Mark came from a wealthy family in Sudan and lived in one of the most upscale areas of Khartoum. His house was large, consisting of 4 floors, with the floors divided into several apartments. The ground floor had a private garden with the servants' quarters. Dr. Mark lived on the first floor with his mother, Mrs. Amelia Smith, who was of Egyptian descent and 75 years old. His father had passed away long ago, and he had 3 siblings: Dr. Adam, a physician living in the UK, Susan, who resided in Qatar and maintained daily contact with him to check on their mother, and a third sister named Sarah, who had distanced herself from Dr. Mark and their mother due to a dispute over inheritance. According to the servants during the investigation, the house was always quiet, well organized, and followed a strict routine that never changed. Mrs. Amelia Smith, Dr. Mark Johnson's mother, was very particular about her interactions with people. She never opened the door for anyone without prior notice. Anyone wishing to visit her had to schedule an appointment in advance. Either she would agree or decline. Even delivery workers would leave packages outside the house, as she never opened the door for them. This explains the plastic bag of fruit and the watermelon found outside the apartment door. Her cautious nature stemmed from the fact that she spent most of her time alone due to her son's work, which kept him busy all day, either at the hospital or his private clinic. The police were certain that whoever committed the crime was someone familiar with the family and well aware of the household's routines. The forensic team confirmed that the perpetrator had a partial key to the house because all the doors and windows were intact, with no signs of forced entry. This meant that either someone entered and opened the door naturally, or someone inside let them in without any resistance. In either case, it was clear that the culprit knew the house and its occupants very well. There were also many stolen items, such as Dr. Mark's and his mother's mobile phones, money, and gold that were in the mother's room. More importantly, Dr. Mark's car was missing, a brand new car from the latest model year that he had purchased just a few weeks earlier and hadn't even fully registered yet. This pointed to someone who had been closely observing the family and knew everything about them. Additionally, the surveillance cameras showed nothing. The person who entered knew exactly where to move to avoid being seen. The camera at the main door was found broken with its wires cut, and no one could determine when it had been damaged. What was even stranger was that there were no unknown fingerprints found in the house, only multiple footprints of different shoe sizes, leading the police to suspect that more than one person was involved in the crime. The forensic report confirmed that Dr. Mark Johnson's death was caused by repeated blows to the head with a sharp object. The fatal blow came about 10 minutes after the initial strikes, indicating that the perpetrator struck Dr. Mark, then waited for a while before delivering the final blow that killed him. This suggests that after initially attacking Dr. Mark and starting to rob the house, the killer realized Dr. Mark was still alive and returned to finish him off. As for Mrs. Amelia Smith, the cause of death was manual strangulation by suffocation. Due to her advanced age, there were no signs of struggle or defensive wounds on her body. More than 200 people were interrogated, including Dr. Mark Johnson's neighbors, friends from the hospital and clinic, and even the gatekeeper who worked for them. This gatekeeper, a Sudanese man, would visit the house twice a day to fill the water tank, clean the garden, and maintain the stairs. Naturally, he was among the circle of suspects because of his close proximity to the house. The same went for the elderly woman who had been helping with the cleaning for over 30 years, though in the last 3 days before the incident, she had sent her daughter in her place because she was unwell. However, after thorough questioning, none of them were found to have any incriminating evidence against them, and they were released. As the investigation expanded, the police uncovered an audio recording of Sarah, Dr. Mark's sister, in which she mentioned that he wanted to file a guardianship case against her, accusing her of being mentally unstable and a danger to their mother. This led to Dr. Mark kicking her out of the house. Sarah claimed in the recording that these were all false accusations meant to deprive her of her rightful inheritance from their father. Because of this recording and the intense family disputes, Sarah became the primary suspect in the case. The police believed she might have planned and executed the crime to seek revenge and claim her share of the inheritance. Sarah was detained and interrogated, but after questioning, she was also released due to insufficient evidence. During the investigation, Sarah insisted that no matter the conflicts between her and her brother, she would never kill her mother or her brother. Meanwhile, the police examined Dr. Mark's phone call records and messages, but found no threatening messages or any clues that could help solve the case. Additionally, the signal from Dr. Mark's phone had been turned off, with the last signal detected inside the house on the day the crime was committed. What further puzzled the police was the disappearance of Dr. Mark's new car, which left no trace. The car's description was circulated to all car dealerships and police stations across Sudan, and patrols were dispatched to search for it in multiple locations. 2 days later, making it a full week since the crime was committed, the police were surprised when a signal was detected from Dr. Mark's phone. Finally, the person who stole the phone, and most likely the one who committed the crime, had either turned it on or sold it. This was the breakthrough that would help the police solve the case. However, the police noticed that the signal was coming from a very remote location, a state called Darlington. The police immediately moved to the location where the signal had appeared. They found a small house, the source of the signal, and arrested the people inside, who were shocked that anyone could find them in such a secluded place. These people turned out to be a gatekeeper of Ethiopian origin named Antonio. According to several sources, Antonio had worked for Dr. Mark for about 6 months, but was dismissed due to his poor character and lack of integrity. After he left, he started working at a cafe on the same street where Dr. Mark lived. Antonio had been closely observing the family, planning to rob Dr. Mark and his mother for their money and jewelry, which he knew the location of very well. When Antonio found out that Dr. Mark had bought a new car, he decided to execute his plan immediately. intending to steal the money, jewelry, and the new car before it was registered. Since Antonio had worked for the family for 6 months, he knew the house's routines and that no one would ever open the door for him if he rang the bell. So, he decided to climb over the garden wall in a spot without cameras and hid for 3 hours before Dr. Mark arrived. When Dr. Mark finally came home, Antonio hit him on the back of the head to completely disorient him, tied him up, and left him on the ground. He then took the house keys from Dr. Mark's pocket, went upstairs, and started searching for the car keys while stealing any money or valuables he could find. Mrs. Helen, Dr. Mark's mother, heard someone entering the house and assumed it was her son. She came out to check on him but was shocked to find Antonio instead. He immediately covered her mouth and suffocated her until she died. He left her body on the living room floor and looked out the window to see Dr. Mark regaining consciousness and trying to free himself. Antonio quickly went downstairs and hit him on the head several more times before dragging him into the servants' room. He then struck him again to ensure he was dead. After taking Dr. Mark's phone and all the money he had on him, Antonio calmly returned upstairs to retrieve the car keys, more money, and any valuables he could find. Antonio spent more than an hour searching the entire house before locking the door behind him. He took the car and left the city of Darlington entirely. What made it easy for Antonio to drive the car without being stopped at any security checkpoint was that he placed a license plate on the car with the word Harmony, indicating that it was a vehicle belonging to the Third Revolutionary Front, one of the groups that signed the peace agreement in the country. Antonio's cousin and accomplice in the crime, who turned on Dr. Mark's phone and led to their capture, never expected that such a small mistake would expose them. To this day, no judgment has been passed on the case because Dr. Mark's siblings live outside the country and Sudanese law gives the victims' families the choice between pardon, compensation, or execution of the accused. When the neighbors and Dr. Mark's acquaintances learned that Antonio, the Ethiopian gatekeeper, was responsible, they were deeply shocked. Everyone confirmed that Dr. Mark and his mother had treated Antonio very well, giving him a lot of money. The main reason for his dismissal was that he had started stealing things. The neighbors lamented that Dr. Mark hadn't filed a report with the police back then, wishing he had handed Antonio over to the authorities. They believed that someone with Antonio's character would only go on to commit even worse crimes. They hoped Antonio and those like him would be sentenced to death. In conclusion, I have changed the names of the characters to make it easier to understand. Don't forget to hit the like button.